Hi everyone, welcome to our AB-900 study cram and the focus on the introduction of Microsoft 365 and the AI administration. Now this is a 900, so a fundamentals exam. I don't have to know all the details of how to do something. It's more about knowing what capabilities exist and then under what component or product that capability is leveraged via. The exam is all about selecting the right answer from a set of options, so a multiple choice. Marking statements as true or false. There are no complex case studies. There's not even labs. Now, to help start preparing for this, definitely go and check out the exam page. The exam page will go into details about what is covered. It will link to the study guide that you should definitely go and look at. There is an exam sandbox if you're taking it online or even at a center. You can understand what the environment is all about. So that's super useful. And then there is a course, and you should 100% go through this course because it will go through all of the various content that you need to know to pass the fundamentals exam. So 100% you should go through that. And I think about this study cram is there to reinforce some of those key things. So go through the learning, check through that study guide, make sure you know all the things, and then this will help reinforce some of those key concepts. So let's get going. And the first key concept here is zero trust. This is very much a fundamental aspect to how we think about security today. And something that's really important to understand is when we think about zero trust, it is not a product. It's not a single product. It's not a toggle that I turn on to say, oh, yes, I want to enable zero trust. There's a lot of processes and solutions and configurations that enable an organization to adopt zero trust. And the reason this is really kind of being embraced is if we think about an organization today, we're using a lot of services in the cloud. Our computers don't just sit at the office, they sit at home in coffee shops. We use our mobile phones. And so the old security focus of the corporate network and having a really strong perimeter edge and firewalls don't cut it anymore. We think layers of security. So that network one is still important. We don't abandon it, but it's no longer the whole story. We don't want to trust something just because it's, for example, on our network. So some of the key principles we now think about is we're going to verify explicitly. So what this means is every request from a user, from a device, from an application is authenticated and authorized. And we're going to take a lot of different signals to make that decision. Now, I said authentication and I said authorization. When we think about those aspects, we think about authentication. I'm going to write auth N. Authentication is all about proving a person is that particular identity. And I can even look at the strength of that authentication. Did they use MFA? Was it phishing resistant? So did I use multi-factor authentication? Did I use a passkey? Did I maybe use Windows Hello for Business? Am I using certificate-based authentication? There's a whole set of different ways that I can prove. And obviously there's password. Although honestly, today, we kind of don't like passwords, especially not on their own. And when we think about things like passkeys, we love passkeys right now because, and we're going to go into more detail, but they can live on a particular device. They might be able to roam through different partners. And the reason we don't like passwords is because it's a network secret. It can be stolen by someone and used. And so these passwordless authentications like passkeys and Hello for Business and certificate-based authentication help give us better practice from security vulnerabilities. Now, when you hear the term MFA, it's multi-factor authentication. I'm using two or more from something you know, like a password or PIN, something you have, which could be a FIDO key or your phone, and something you are, a biometric, like a face scan. So it could be, okay, I type in a password and then I type in a code that was from the Authenticator app. Or I type in a password and then a code that was texted to me. Now, passkeys are still two things. You might say, I've got a passkey on my phone, that's just one thing. So realize the passkey exists on the phone, something you have, and then you have to unlock it. And you unlock it via a PIN, something you know, or a biometric, a face scan, something you are. And we really like passkeys because they're considered phishing resistant. So if I had a passkey on my phone, for example, and wanted to authenticate my computer, well, the phone has to have a proximity to the computer that I'm authenticating, either Bluetooth or near-field communications. So I can't be tricked to authenticate a bad actor's machine hundreds of miles away. It won't let me. And also, when I try to authenticate using a passkey, if someone is trying to trick me to authenticating to a site that looks the same, so instead of Microsoft.com, it's RN, that R in the end looks like an M, it won't work because the passkey will only be able to be used with the exact domain for which the passkey was created. So it helps protect me from many types of phishing attacks as the user, and also super convenient. Now, if that's authentication proving I am a particular identity so I can use it, we think of authorization, auth-z, I'm going to say. This is all about what you're allowed to do. And one of the big focus areas here is something called conditional access. This is a feature of Entra, but conditional access can look at risk signals of the user of a sign-in via identity protection. And we'll actually take that. So we can think about identity protection, can understand the risk that's happening to us right there. And it could look at what's normal behavior for the user. What are normal times to sign in? What are the normal devices? If it sees using a Tor browser or their credentials are found on the dark web, well, that would be a signal that the user is at increased risk. Conditional access can also look at the strength of the authentication. So, hey, I want a certain strong signal to allow the login. If we jump over super quickly, and if I go to Entra, so this is the Entra portal. When you focus on M365, you won't use this a huge amount, but realize the identity that you use in Microsoft 365 is from an Entra tenant. There's not like a separate identity. But if I scroll down and I find conditional access, these are the policies that are going to control what is required to be able to use certain apps or certain roles. Now, straight away, you'll see things like, well, there's terms of use. So these can be PDF documents that I can require people accept before they can continue on. You can see here I have things like authentication strengths. So I could require a certain type of authentication, in this case, Hello for Business, a passkey or certificate-based authentication, before I can use a certain application. Maybe it's like a really high priority app. So I can view that. And then I can use all these different things in a policy. So if I just jump over and look at any policy, it doesn't really matter. If I look at multi-factor authentication for global administrators, you'll see I can target specific groups of users or agents. I can target specific types of resources. This could be a cloud app. It could be I want to use a certain type of resource. It could be other types of things. In this case, it's the Azure portal. I can exclude certain things. I can hook into things like Global Secure Access Client, which is used for machines to access private resources or internet controls. And then I can set conditions. And notice here we have things like the user risk and the sign-in risk that comes from identity protection. We have insider risk, which could detect whether the user's doing suspicious things, so I want to maybe restrict them. We can look at the device platform, what location, what client app they're using, particular authentication flows that are being leveraged. And then I can choose, I want to block access or grant access. And then, for example, here, if I'm granting access, I could just require MFA, or I could be more specific and require a particular authentication strength. I could do things like requiring the device to be marked as compliant according to things like Intune and Defender for Endpoint. Has to be joined to Entra. Maybe I want them to change their password if I see the user is at risk. I can require them to accept a certain terms of use. So I have all these different controls, and I can even control down to individual session level access. So maybe I want to restrict what they can do because of certain things that I've seen. I could make them sign in again. So conditional access is really about governing controls for things I want to take effect before they can go and leverage a certain service. So authentication, proving who you are, authorization, what you can then go and do. The next principle is all about least privilege. And so I think about, we have a set of permissions. And what I want to do here is only give just enough. We also hear it called just enough administration. JEA, just enough administration. So only give them enough to do the task it needs to do. This could be a human, it could be an agent. You only ever give something exactly the permissions required to get the job done. And if it's a higher level permission, I think about something called JIT, just in time. And that means I don't have it all the time. I only get that permission at the time I need to use it, and then I lose it again. Imagine I'm an administrator. Ordinarily, I'm using Word, I'm using the web. I shouldn't have global administrator permissions all the time. So when I need to do global admin, I elevate up, which could require a stronger authentication. Maybe I have to be on a compliant work device. Then I can use that permission, but then I lose it again. And the goal here is if a bad actor got hold of the account, well, they can only do the bare basic things. They can't do those high-level permissions because they can't elevate up. And also it helps protect the user. They don't accidentally wipe something out they probably shouldn't do. As we think about these just enough, we use a number of different constructs. So one of these is role-based access control, RBAC. So this is all about the identities only have exactly the roles required to do the job. We also think about identity governance. So with identity governance, what I can do is I can create entitlement management access packages. So an access package could contain membership of certain groups and teams, access to certain applications, access to certain SharePoint sites, maybe Microsoft Entra roles or API permissions. And then I get that for a finite amount of time, maybe 2 months, 3 months while I'm on the project. It can go through approval flows, and then I would lose it. I can think about things like, for this just in time, the solution is privileged identity management. So what that lets me do is activate maybe a higher role for that limited time window. The next key thing we think about here is assume breach. That's obviously kind of a scary one, but we assume that bad people are on the network already. So what do? If we assume there are malicious actors on our network, we have to constantly look for signals of the activities they're performing. So it's all about taking signals from as many different sources as possible and then correlating those signals. Now, the way we do that is one of the solutions here we think about is Microsoft Sentinel. So if I think about, okay, well, we have Sentinel. Sentinel lets us have all of these different signals coming into a single place. Now, those signals could be coming in, for example, from my devices. So maybe I'm using Defender for Endpoint. Well, it sends the signals into here. It could be coming from our on-premises domain controllers. So we have things like Defender for Identity. So those have agents that sit on our domain controllers, our federation services, our Connect servers. They send those signals in. It could be also, I think about other capabilities that exist in our organization, other tooling. And then if we think about all of those different signals, we can then act on those. I'd also get signals, for example, from my cloud identities. But within Sentinel, I can do things like hunting. I can look for signs of threats. I can then detect the threats. There's AI capabilities to help me. So there's all these things that would help me go and understand what's happening in my environment. So it's all about collecting the signals and then correlating the signals from all these different places to understand, well, what is actually my posture? Now, one of the good places to start is actually the Entra portal, because one of the things we can do in the Entra portal is if I just go, well, straight on the home page, if you scroll down, one of the things you see is this idea of a tenant status. And it's actually showing me this identity score, 91.08%, and I could view the recommendations. I can also access this from the overview of my tenant and then go to Recommendations tab. And once again, I will see that score, that percentage, and then it's showing me the history of how it's changed over time. And then I'll see the recommendations. And what you're looking at here is you'll have like high, medium, low priorities. You'll have the actual recommendation, so the action you want to take. But what you're really looking for here is obviously the higher priority, the more important it is you address it. But it will then show you, well, how many points is this actually impacting from your secure score? So for example, this one, out of a possible 8 points, I've only got 0. So that would be able to obviously have a bigger impact. So if I had 7 out of 8, well, if I addressed it, I don't get that many more points. But if I've got 0 out of 8, well, obviously there's a big impact if I actually go and address this thing. So it's important to understand exactly what those things are, so I know, well, where should I focus my time. So if I think protection and capabilities, one of the big solutions we have is something called Defender XDR, Extended Detection and Response. And there's a number of different capabilities. So if I think about Defender XDR, this aims to unify protection across services to ensure a very comprehensive and coordinated adaptive set of protections. And as I mentioned, there's a number of different capabilities. So one of the big ones is Defender for Office 365. So this is going to help, for example, detect phishing attacks on your employees. So it's some bad actor trying to trick your employees. It will detect malware. It will look at malicious URLs and attachments being sent, try and get them to click into bad places. It can help you conduct attack simulation training. So this is a phishing campaign that you're going to send out to your users to help educate them, to get them to see, oh, okay, so this is what I need to be looking out for, and this is how I should react differently. So those attack simulations is part of the Plan 2 SKU or M365E5. M365E5 includes the Plan 2 SKU of Defender for Office 365. It includes things like Threat Explorer. So that uses signals from the Microsoft Threat Intelligence to investigate issues as they are happening. There is Defender for Endpoint. So if I think about endpoint, well, that's all about my various endpoint devices. So that has endpoint detection response, EDR. So think anti-malware, thinking reducing my attack surface, think automated investigations. It's helping protect the endpoints and again, provide the signals into Sentinel so we have that broader understanding of what's happening. And I can do things like track an attack path. So I say, oh, well, an email was received with an attachment. So clicked the attachment. The attachment spawned this process. This process then went and spoke to this server. Then there was a side attack. It moved and gained credentials on another machine. It will help you track all of that. As we talked about, also we have Defender for Identity. And Defender for Identity is all about the idea that we have in most organizations an on-premises set of identity services, for example, Active Directory domain services. And then what happens in most of our organizations is then you have Entra, which is the home of your cloud identities. And most of the time we are synchronizing those up into Entra ID. But you can imagine this on-prem is still really important, because if there was a credential attacked and compromised on-prem, well, that would probably bleed over and then spread into the cloud. So I want to understand that. There's also Defender for Cloud Apps. So we think about all the various applications in the cloud that are being used. We get visibility into those as well. We get threat analytics. This is a library of threat intelligence reports written by Microsoft security researchers to help give us full awareness. So that is a super high level of the landscape we think about. But one of the big pushes is around identity, because if I said the network perimeter is no longer the focal point for security because we're using stuff in the cloud, our devices can be anywhere, the identity actually becomes, in a lot of ways, that first security perimeter. So an identity is the digital persona, the representation of a person, an application, an AI agent. Now, as I think about an identity, so let's take the idea that, okay, I've got some particular identity. Could be a user, could be an agent, but they're going to have various attributes. I would think about the idea, well, they probably have a username. They have a password. They might have a pass key or other ways to authenticate. If it was an application, it might have a certificate. It might have a secret. It has maybe various other attributes like the department. There's various aspects to them. Now, this is an identity that lives in Entra. So, for example, it has a user object. But if I'm a hybrid organization that also has Active Directory, what's happening here is this identity actually started out in Active Directory, and then it was synchronized up into the cloud, up into Entra. So it is this synchronization process. And when we have this on-prem and cloud version of an identity, well, we think of it as a hybrid user or hybrid identity because it exists in both. Now, if the identity was created directly in Entra, i.e. it was not synchronized from Active Directory, well, then that identity we would call just a cloud only. So this would be a cloud only. It did not synchronize from AD. It was created. It was born in the cloud. Now, let's think about that hybrid scenario for a second. Because realize all of these attributes, actually the source of truth is here in Active Directory. And imagine for a big one, the password. Because if I'm trying to authenticate to on-prem and in the cloud, that password could be one of the anchors of that authentication. And one of the attributes we have here for this user is the idea that they have a password hash. Well, if I want to be able to authenticate in the cloud directly, I need that password hash to be able to authenticate. So we do have different options. So one option is we create a hash of the hash and we sync that up as well. So this is called password hash sync, where we synchronize the hash of the hash. And we kind of like this approach. It doesn't have any dependency on Active Directory to be able to authenticate. I just authenticate straight into Entra using the password, or again, probably going to create other types of credential. And also, Entra now knows the hash of the hash, so you can go and look on the dark web to see, well, has that credential been leaked? Another option is we can use something called pass-through authentication. What happens here is I still authenticate against Entra, but it basically now creates basically a request to say, hey, I need this credential authenticated. And then what will happen is a domain controller that lives on-prem will take that request, check it against the password. If it's good, they say yes, and then they're authenticated. This can be useful if I need certain AD capabilities that Entra doesn't support, things like sign-in hours, certain types of lockout. But it now requires Active Directory to be available. So we don't like this as much. And then the other type is we just use something called federation. Federation means when I authenticate to Entra, I actually get redirected to on-premises, which means I need a whole set of authentication services running on-prem. This could be Active Directory federation services, so I have to host it, manage it, scale it. I have to open up ports to the internet. And so what would happen is then I would get a token from the federation services that I then give to Entra, which switches it out for an Entra token. You don't need to understand all those concepts, but it basically means I need all of this running and a whole set of other stuff. Generally, we don't really like that anymore. There's too much stuff to have to maintain. Historically, companies used it because, hey, they had other cloud services that they wanted to be able to have users have a very seamless way to use. Today, we tend to federate those cloud services with Entra, and it does all of the work for us. Now, so those are the options available. And again, this federation, I would have required a whole set of federation services to expose things, create tokens, and make available for us. So the password, people forget passwords. So one of the capabilities we have up in Entra is the idea of something called a self-service password reset. And that can actually work both for hybrid. It will go and talk to the on-prem domain controllers, assuming I have password write-back enabled. It can also work for cloud-only accounts. And it lets the users reset the password themselves. Maybe they have to get a certain text code sent to them. Maybe they have to answer certain questions. Now, I'm going to note something. This is in preview at time of recording this, and I don't think it's in the exam, but it probably will be in the future. One of the new capabilities is to enable users to basically self-re-certify themselves using a verified ID. So what would happen is, hey, I've lost my password, maybe it's a passkey on my phone. I would go to a third-party service that my tenant has configured to trust. I would prove I am who I say I am. I show like a government ID, a passport. It would take a picture of me. It would then create something called a verified credential. This is a decentralized identity that I own. It lives in my digital wallet, like on my phone. And then I would present that back to Entra, say, hey, look, I am who I say I am. I forgot my password. And then it would let them recreate a new passkey, recreate a new password, removing any human to help validate that person. So it's a very high assurance capability. Another nice feature I get with all of these ideas is something called single sign-on. The whole point here is I don't want a user to have to keep typing in passwords and authenticating for all the different cloud services they use or on-prem stuff. So single sign-on says, hey, I authenticate once, and then I can just keep using that authentication. Behind the scenes, like on my Windows machine, I might be using Hello for Business that's taking care, including this hybrid scenario. If I'm on a phone, then there's something called the Microsoft Authenticator app that acts as a token broker. So all the different apps you use on that phone, actually the Authenticator app is using a Microsoft authentication library, and it's going and getting all those tokens for you completely seamless. It's a nice, strong authentication, nothing you have to go and worry about. So it does a lot of that work just for you. So that's really kind of a key point about all of that. Okay, so this is a general identity, some of the key security solutions, zero trust. Let's talk a little bit about this idea of the RBAC that I mentioned there, and we can drill into that a little bit further. So remember, we think about role-based access control as defining what I can do, the authorization for a particular scope. Now, the way this normally works, and let's drill into this RBAC. So let's go and look in RBAC in a little bit more detail. I can think about, well, sure, there's different users. But generally, I don't want to be assigning permission on a per user basis. It's very cumbersome, and I constantly have to be updating, adding, removing permissions. So what we would normally do instead is I will create groups. So I will create a security group, and I put the users into the security group. Now I've got a group. What I would now do is for that group, I would grant it a particular role. So now I can think about, okay, so there's some role, and the role member is a set of permissions or actions that I can perform. So I would take the role, apply it to a security group for a certain scope. Now, the scope could be a mailbox. The scope could be a SharePoint site. The scope could be any number of things. It could be a calendar. But the whole goal here is it's a very defined way to accomplish this. So it's a role assignment. Yes, I could assign it to the users, but ideally, hey, I'm giving a role to a group at a particular scope. There are many different roles. There's something called global admin. So global admin is an Entra role that is the highest privilege role that exists. It can do pretty much anything. There are a lot of built-in roles, but I can also create custom roles. So if there's a certain built-in roles that are just not meeting the needs, maybe it's got too many permissions, so it's not following that just enough administration, I can create my own role. When I have these roles and role assignments, so again, the whole goal of what I'm doing here is a role assignment. I want good policies around that. So we want to validate. There are things like access reviews. And that's a process where an app owner or a manager, or even I can do self-attestation, say, yes, I should still have this role assignment. I should still be part of this group. And then if I think about it, I was granting this role to a group, well, I can use things like entitlement management, as we talked about, to add into a group. I can use privileged identity management to elevate up into a group or elevate up into a role. There's even things called dynamic groups. So ordinarily with a group, we're adding people into the group, and then we have to remove them from the group. With a dynamic group, what we do is we create a rule, and the rule defines, okay, your department equals this value, you're in this group. So then imagine if a user changed role, well, their department would change because they moved to a different department. They would then come out of that group because that dynamic rule doesn't match them anymore. So I don't end up with lingering or this ever-growing set of permissions for a user, which is generally a big, big issue. Now, I talked about the idea of a security group. There is also an idea of an M365 group. Now, this is all about collaboration. Think about a normal user has a mailbox, has a calendar. But imagine I've got a scenario where I want a shared mailbox or a shared calendar. Well, this is what these capabilities enable. An M365 group can have a resource. It has a group calendar. It has a group mailbox. It has a SharePoint document library. And then all the people I add to that M365 group can go and use that shared resource. Another thing I can do, I can optionally mail enable a security group. So that means it can be used for security purposes. It can have roles assigned. But if I email that security group, all the people in the group would receive that email as well. Now, security groups are a core Entra feature. I would manage them via the Entra portal. However, M365 admins, you're probably going to use the M365 Admin Center as a single place to go. For mail-enabled security groups, for things like distribution lists, which can only be used to send to a bunch of people, I have to use the M365 portal. I don't have any kind of choice in that. We could jump over and quickly look. So if I jump over, so here in the Entra portal, you can see I can see groups. And I can see all the different groups. But there will be some, like M365 All Company, they don't work properly in certain ways. Like it won't want to edit all of these things. If I did like a distribution list, it won't want to work in this. So like mail-enabled security. Instead, I would think about using the M365 Admin Center. We see I have these teams and groups. And I could go and look at active teams and groups. And from here, it understands the concept of, well, there's those M365 groups. It understands, okay, there's also distribution lists. And then the security groups that, hey, this case, this one was mail enabled. So I can use the M365 admin portal to go and manage all of those different types. So even though they're Entra resources, 100%, most likely what I'm going to be doing as an M365 admin is the M365 admin portal. That's going to be the place I'm going to go. But just realize all of these user objects, group objects, they are Entra objects. There is not a separate M365 set of users or groups. You're using an Entra tenant. When I think about assigning licenses to users and groups, well, those things, they are all going to be done through the M365 admin portal as well. For larger scale automations, I can use PowerShell, I can use a Graph API, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as time goes on. Now, obviously, the goal of this course is a lot about M365 and kind of the capabilities that you can do. So let's actually dive into and look at, well, what are the different M365 capabilities? Now, the first thing to actually I want to focus on here is when I have an M365 tenant, it's made up of one or more domains. So I have, and I can have more than one. So for example, saviltech.net. It's what I could use as part of, for example, my email address. And that would be part of my, again, Entra ID config, but I can also manage it in the M365 Admin Center. I would go to settings domains, and I can go and add them there. And I mentioned the global administrator before. Global administrator is an Entra role, but it has full access across pretty much all of the M365 capabilities, including all of these different things we are about to talk about. So just realize, if I'm a global admin, it's basically that God role with nearly anything within our Entra tenant and within our M365 and many other things as well. So M365, let's think about the core capabilities that make up M365. So the first one is going to be Exchange Online. So that we think about our mail capabilities, our calendar capabilities. We have special roles. There's an Exchange administrator. They can manage mailboxes. They can manage mail flows. They can set anti-spam policies. There's various organizational management role groups, so I can get specific features enabled for me. Within Exchange Online, I can configure things like transport rules, also known as mail flow rules. So I could inspect email. I could block emails. I could make certain emails be encrypted. I could redirect. I could even append certain disclaimers. I can do things like configure accepted domains and connectors. I might use retention policies to ensure we keep deleted emails for a certain amount of time. I can do litigation holds to ensure all content is kept for a whole duration during some legal process. I can think about Microsoft Teams. So obviously Teams, we think about, well, there's chat capabilities, there's meetings, there's, I don't know how to draw a meeting, various types of collaborations, calling, app integrations. There is a separate Teams administrator role. They can manage team creations, policies, app integrations. I can think about SharePoint Online. So SharePoint Online is really about content management. It could be our intranet platform. That's supposed to be a globe. I can't draw a globe. But I create libraries of documents. Often I think about co-authoring. So when I co-author a document in Word or PowerPoint or whatever, it's stored on SharePoint and it's enabling those capabilities. There are SharePoint administrator roles that I can set at a site level. So a site is a certain subset of the content and has its own themes and pages and document libraries. I have control around certain types of sharing. I can also grant different permissions to sites. So if I think about this, I always think about the idea of we have various sites. And this is actually a really important one because I can have visitors to my site. So a visitor, for example, just gets read-only access. I can make you a member. So a member, hey, you can do edit capabilities. Or you can be an owner. An owner can do anything, so I have full control. I can do everything I want. And there's capabilities like SharePoint lifecycle management that's part of the SharePoint advanced management capabilities to enforce certain sets of configuration. For example, I want to make sure there's always at least 2 owners of any site. And then we think about OneDrive. OneDrive actually behind the scenes is leveraging some of the SharePoint storage, but it's where I think about as my personal collection of documents. So those are like some of the core services. When I write an application, when I'm using a tool, one of the things that spans all of these capabilities is something called the Microsoft Graph. Myself is enough space. So Microsoft. So Microsoft Graph is spanning all of this data. It understands all of the data that's in all of those different services. It provides a single API to work with that M365 data. But in addition to like these core services, obviously a big thing we have today is we hear about copilots. We hear about AI-powered agents. And so when I think about those capabilities, if I think about AI, we can really break it down into these 2 key types. I can think about, yes, I have copilots. And with a copilot, really think of it as an assistant. It is working with the human. It's working with the context and the task that I'm currently doing. You'll see copilots in the Office apps like Word and PowerPoint and Excel. We see them in the various M365 experiences. They provide natural language interactions. I ask it to do something. So for example, if I'm in Outlook, I can ask it to, hey, summarize this huge thread of messages. In Teams, summarize this meeting I missed, or what action items were assigned to me. I can ask it to go and find me data in SharePoint or OneDrive. And it can just help me do things in Word, Excel, PowerPoint. Hey, create me a presentation based on this document. Now, a copilot is always acting on behalf of a user, i.e., it can only see and do what the user can see and do. It cannot access data that the user cannot access. If you think about the user's authenticated and has a token, that's their identity, and they're given roles and access, when I'm working with a copilot, it's using that same token. So it cannot do anything I cannot do. There are certain things I can do to customize. So there's a medium amount of customization. For example, at a certain tenant level, I might do certain things. There's things like Copilot tuning to maybe make it behave in a different way. And then you have the AI-powered agents. Wrong color. All right. So then we have the agents. Now, there are a whole range of agents. They can automate tasks. They can maybe trigger by some event like an email being received. They can run on a recurrence. They may interact with humans, or they may be, optionally, completely autonomous. They don't have to be, but they can be. So they range from retrieving information to performing some tasks when asked to running autonomously, planning out advanced sequences of steps required on what it's being asked to do. Now, if I think about agents, there are a whole number that are pre-built and are just included. So again, we look across the various experience. There's a writing coach to help me when I'm writing something. There's a prompt coach to help me streamline my prompts. There's things like researcher. Researcher is great for complex, multi-step researching across huge amounts of, for example, unstructured data. There's an analyst agent. That's a data scientist. It's working across large, complex data sets. Hey, find me some insight from this data. SharePoint typically will have an agent for each of its sites, but users could create their own using M365 Copilot Studio or Copilot Chat, and also in SharePoint directly. So I have this idea of also custom. So I can think, okay, those custom ones, yes, I can use the M365 chat experience, just using a Copilot Studio for chat or SharePoint. But then I can also think about more advanced capabilities where I directly go and hook into things like Copilot Studio and maybe even VS Code. And basically the idea here is we're kind of going from simple to more complex. Like when I'm using Copilot Studio, it's a low, no code. I'm explaining what I want it to do. I'm adding in certain bits of data I want it to use. VS Code would be pro code. I'm actually writing code. I'm hooking into models from things like Foundry. I can hook into web content by integrating with Bing. I can hook into SharePoint and OneDrive data via the built-in connectors. I can hook into Copilot connectors to go and talk to Salesforce, to ServiceNow. Basically, if the service is integrated with M365 Search, then I can go and hook into it. Now, when I think about creating an agent in Copilot Studio, there's actually two different approaches. There's an approach where I just describe what I want it to do. So I might call this a light approach. And then there's also the full, where I actually go through and I configure everything I want it to do. And I can start in light and describe what I want, and then switch over to the full experience to maybe do more complex customizations. So if we quickly jump over, so if we are in Copilot Studio, notice I could just start describing, and there's different types of ones where it would help me kick off. It's basically templates, and there's a whole bunch of different types of agents down the bottom, and there's more that I could go use to start creating my own agent. I don't have to start from scratch. But I also can just start from scratch, create a new agent. And what you see here is the default is describe. So that's the light experience. I'm just going to use natural language to tell it, well, this is what I want it to do. You go and work out how to do it. Or I can switch it to configure for the full set of customization options. So in describe, I would just start typing in what I want it to do, and it would work out the agent. And at any time I can test it over here in this right-hand window. But if I hit configure, now I can see all the particular items. As you can see, I can set the icon. I would definitely give it a name and a description. But then what's really important is the instruction. So this is where you're going to describe exactly what you want the agent to do, the tone in which it's going to interact, exactly what it needs to do, any rules or guidelines it has to follow. I can also add knowledge. So when I think about knowledge, I can add up to 20 different knowledge sources. You can see our public websites, SharePoint sites, the Dataverse, Dynamics 365, Fabric here you can see is coming. I can upload files, so up to 512 meg. It is going to respect, and this is an important part, any kind of confidential labeling we have in our organization, so I can restrict what it's going to use. So I'm adding knowledge. I could also say if it's allowed to use the web. So it would use Bing search to go and find additional information. I can add suggested prompts. But I'm basically going through and configuring exactly what I want this agent to do. If I cancel this quickly, if I go and look at another agent, this was an email response agent. So it was autonomous. So autonomous means it has to have a trigger. So the trigger was, hey, I receive an email. I gave it a whole set of instructions, what I want it to do. I added some knowledge. So in this case, I actually added a whole set of my YouTube transcripts. So it would go and have information that it could use to answer the various questions. This is an example of an agent that would run autonomously. It would just go and do that task. Now, when I think about these agents, these are typically going to have their own identity. Because most likely it's going to have to operate across a broader range of data maybe than just a user has. Now, in the past, and we still can use things like a special service account, if it's an Azure resource and managed identity. Preview at time of recording, there's something called Entra ID. And that's a new way to give agents their own identity. And if I create an agent in Copilot Studio or M365 Copilot or Security Copilot or Microsoft Foundry, they will get their own agent identity automatically. So I have full ability to customize these. So I can make it do anything within the capability set of, for example, Copilot Studio. So obviously there might be certain types of data I want to talk to that Copilot Studio doesn't support. Maybe there's a certain API or interface I want to use that it doesn't support. Well, then maybe I have to go and switch to some of the more pro code, VS Code, and kind of Foundry. When I write an agent, try to avoid working with, for example, graphical interfaces. There is something called computer use, where agents can go and actually interact with a computer. But then if the portal, the UI changed, it would impact my agent's ability to work properly. So instead, focus on trying to use APIs. Use MCP, Model Context Protocol servers. Model Context Protocol is a standard way for AI apps to talk to additional knowledge, additional tooling, and those additional knowledge and tools reflect their capabilities in a way the large language model just understands. I don't have to do anything. As an organization, I can have full governance capabilities of this. I can actually go and say, hey, I have to approve agents before they can actually be used. If I was in the M365 portal, for example, and you'll actually notice there's kind of agents over here. So this is where more information on agents will start showing up. This is now part of this newer registry idea. But even outside of that, if I was in my reporting and I went to usage, one of the things you can see here is things like my copilots. So I'd be able to see the different Copilot agents in my environment. I can see what the agents are. So I can actually go and drill down into that. I don't have any in this environment. This is just like a play tenant. But this is how you could actually start to dig in and see what is going on in your environment. So if I was to really summarize how you think about this, think of it as employees have copilots. Think of them as personal assistants. And then we have agents working on behalf of a certain business process that is maybe doing something on behalf of employees and teams. Now, behind the scenes, all of these AI capabilities, I mean, it's not magic. Behind the scenes, it's using these large language models. These are these digital brains that seemingly do amazing things by predicting the next most probable token and the next one. They're called tokens based on what you give it. So you give it some prompt and it then works out what to do. The problem is this large language model knows nothing about your data. It was trained on a huge corpus of data, internet data, books, etc. But none of that was your emails or your SharePoint or anything else. So if I want these copilots or AI assistants to work on behalf of my data, how does it do it? So we have to give it additional information, a thing called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. And what's going to happen here is when these copilots want to work, they get a certain prompt. Well, this needs to go and ask the Microsoft Graph. But it's natural language. And just regular indexes don't work fantastically with natural language because one word can mean many things, many words can mean the same thing. And so what sits on top of the Microsoft Graph is this idea of a semantic index. that also spans all that same type of data. And that is actually what the large language model is going to go and ask for. Hey, I need some more information. Now, what's critical here is all of your role-based access control is enforced. If I don't have access to a document or a piece of data, nor does a semantic index. It is not going to go and find any additional stuff I don't normally have access to. You often hear about training the models. There is no training done of these models on your data. So these models are not trained on your data or prompts. So your business interactions are not going to then go and train the model for future use. So none of your responses, your prompts, your data is used to train these models. So that's completely safe. It makes a request, you get a response back. Nothing is kept for training purposes. So the whole idea here is, as a user, okay, I put in some prompt in my Copilot or whatever it is. The Copilot then is like an orchestrator. It might say, oh, I need additional information. It will go and query the semantic index to get the additional information and then gives it to the large language model with the prompt. And it adds additional instructions called a system prompt to the request to the model that guides how it works. It might give it examples of the type of interaction it wants. And the model creates the response, gets cleaned up, and it goes back to the user. Both the prompt going in and the response coming out goes through content safety to make sure it's not offensive. It does groundedness detection to make sure, or minimizing things like hallucinations. Large language models can be prone to hallucinate. It's getting a lot rarer today, but it will state very authoritatively something that it's just made up. It's not actually true. So you want to be very careful and have the right checking in place of how we use these things. So we would go through like a pilot, you have evaluations, you do all the same things you would normally do with anything else. Now, something I would kind of stress here is, again, this is kind of in preview at this moment in time, but this semantic index was previously only leveraged by Copilot and those sort of Microsoft agents. One of the things they have announced is there's now this concept of something called Work IQ. Work IQ leverages this semantic index, but what it lets me is other AI apps that I'm writing somewhere else can now go and talk to Work IQ and get that same kind of semantic index that is powering the Copilots. So it's making it more adaptable. Now, I mentioned the idea of prompts that the users are leveraging. A user may have a certain prompt they use time and time again. So these prompts can be saved, and obviously they can be deleted. I might want to share prompts with a certain group of users, so you can share groups. I may want to make them scheduled, so they automatically run on some cadence. Every morning, go and run this stuff and get it ready as I start work. As an admin, I can control the sharing of prompts. In the M365 admin portal, I could restrict the sharing of prompts to certain roles, to certain groups. I can audit the use of prompts, so I do have full visibility in that. Now, one thing just to be aware of, and kind of all of this, is this concept of like responsible AI. Now, there's a few things that they focus on in the training. One of them is transparency. Now, normally transparency is focused on, how the decision was made, like the working and the full process of the model should be understood. But here it's also focusing on, you should know the source data. It should show that to you. It should be auditable. I should know the prompt history, the data access, the AI responses available to the admins. Remember, if you do have agents, there is still a human that ultimately should be responsible for the actions, the data that was taken. We think about it should be safe. So we focus on the idea of content safety to block harmful, offensive content. It should only use the minimal amount of data required to get the job done. Now, again, those are kind of focused on the Copilot. There are broader responsible AI that we're just focused on here. And these are like fairness. It should treat everyone the same. The system should perform reliably and safely. They should be secure and respect privacy. They should include and enable everyone to leverage it. They should be understandable with the transparency. And the people should be accountable for the AI systems. So those are just the more general responsible AI principles. Now, I do want to call something out. And the semantic index kind of exposes something. It's not a problem with the semantic index, but it suddenly makes finding information much, much easier. I may have had access previously to a certain SharePoint site or a page that had sensitive data in it, but I didn't know it was there. I couldn't easily find it. It was kind of security by obscurity, which is terrible, but it kind of worked. That doesn't work anymore. Suddenly, this semantic index, I use a natural language query, it will find everything. And one of the biggest problems we often find are SharePoint sites that are completely mispermissioned. They have not restricted things correctly. And so suddenly the semantic index, because it's respecting RBAC, but if the RBAC is not strong on the original data, then that same data will be exposed. So one of the really important things we probably are going to need to do is to get our data AI ready. So for example, if I'm a SharePoint site owner, I need to properly control who has access to the site. For example, most SharePoint sites should be private, not public. Now, there are a few different things I can do to help mitigate and improve the situation when I think about all of these capabilities. So one of them is there's something called SharePoint Advanced Management. Now, I get that as part of M365 Copilot licensing, but there is a permission site report that I can generate. Think of it as an oversharing report. And it will show me sites that we think are over-permissioned. And then the site owner can do a site access review to validate, well, here are the people that have access. This is probably what I should restrict. If I believe a site is completely mispermissioned, what I can do is something called restricted content discovery. So I set this at a site level. I can set restricted content discovery. And now that semantic index and Copilot will not use it to search and ground on the content. Now, if my organization is in such a state, I can also use something called restricted SharePoint search. And that's 100 sites max. But if it's a hub site, it does include the child sites as well. They don't count towards that 100. I can restrict Copilot to only use the sites I add to this restricted SharePoint search. So maybe my SharePoint is in just such a huge mess. I know I've got a bunch of work to do to clean up the permissions, but maybe my HR site and some other core sites I've got ready, I could add them to this restricted SharePoint search and then let Copilot reason over that. So next thing we have to think about is that content protection. So if this is things I can do at a site level in SharePoint, we'll realize you also have a ton of other data. You have more granular data. I have restricted content. I have other things going on. So we need a whole set of capabilities that I think about for just my general content protection. So if I think content protection, the solution we're thinking here is Purview. So if we ask about protecting content, and it includes a lot of the M365 stack, Purview is that primary solution. Now, Purview has actually a whole set of different capabilities. So the first one is something called information protection. And this is one of the most used capabilities. I can define things like labels. So I can define sensitivity labels that can then be applied to data, like my OneDrive, like my SharePoint. So I apply those labels. And the labels can mandate certain things. Maybe it means I have to encrypt the data. Maybe it means it will show watermarking on the data. So it will say, hey, this is privileged not to be shared. Maybe it can even restrict who is actually allowed to access that data. And it will actually go and discover where sensitive data is. It will then automatically classify it using built-in rules, custom rules. Labels can manually be applied, but also automatically applied based on these. There's actually trainable classifiers that use AI. So I can have a whole set of data, I feed it into the trainable classifier, and it will use AI to work out, okay, so what is the characteristics of these documents that make it this certain classification? And it just does all of that for me. So this is a huge one. Then we think about data loss prevention. So this is all about stopping of leaking sensitive data. So we can do things like blocking. So, hey, you cannot share this data, or at least notify you. It can also do notifications. So so-and-so is sharing this, so-and-so is copying this, so-and-so is doing whatever it is. And one of the interesting things about data loss prevention is I can target copilots. So imagine there was some label of highly confidential. I could actually say, hey, I don't want copilots to use this data. So I could stop AI reasoning over that data as well. So that's a really nice capability. And we have data lifecycle management. So that's all about retention policies. So I can ensure a certain life cycle of data, both for keeping data, archiving data, but making sure it's deleted. There is insider risk management. So that's looking for activities that are unusual. Someone suddenly copies 300 documents to Dropbox. Well, that's probably a sign that they're up to no good. And one of the really nice things is that this can actually integrate with conditional access. So if I'm starting to detect weird behavior, I might block them from accessing an application. I can also pair this insider risk management capability with data loss prevention through something called adaptive protection. So if I see that suspicious behavior, I'll start heightening the risk. As I heighten the risk, I can apply a more restricted DLP policy. So then, for example, to actually go and block them. There is something called communication compliance. So that's all about looking at email, Teams, Yammer to ensure, hey, you're just meeting regulatory organizational policies around standards of communication between people. There is DSPM for AI. So data security posture management. So it looks at sensitive data being used by AI to help assess and enforce policies over the AI use of the data. So it can do things like capturing the AI prompts used. The response is, I can use an activity explorer to actually go and see it. And I can, for example, look at Copilot interactions for the last 30 days. It can help find shadow AI, so non-corporate AI services that users may be using with your data. And all of this is Purview. Now, there are also some core tools that I can leverage on top of all those capabilities. So one of them is Compliance Manager. So you think about a lot of companies today, they fall under certain regulations, certain different country or industry. So I can specify a regulation and get a compliance score. And then I'll get a list of controls I need to enable. I can assign them to people to help improve and track that progress. There is something called Data Explorer. Data Explorer will help see where sensitive data is, find all my social security numbers, find credit card numbers. And then I can think about things like content search and e-discovery. So when I have to be able to locate, review, preserve information based on an audit or legal or request or internal investigations, I can do all of that through the various Purview types of tools. So it's super, super powerful. Okay, so wondrous things. How do we license them? So let's go back to where we had all of our various stuff over here. Okay, so let's think about how I can, we all love licensing. So how do I license this stuff? And when I think about Copilot, there's actually a number of different types of license we can have. So there's actually something called Copilot Chat. So Copilot Chat, well, Copilot Chat is free. So it's a natural language interaction. It can work with web data, i.e. Bing search, but it cannot work against Microsoft Graph. So it can't work for your work data. So it's free, but I can't work with my work stuff. Okay, then we have, we have M365 Copilot Paid. So now I'm obviously paying for a license for my users to go and use those services. And as you would absolutely expect with the paid, yes, I can go and now ground on work. Now, there are different plans. There's a business plan for smaller companies that use business licensing. That means 300 users max. It lacks Purview, it lacks insider risk management. Then there's an enterprise add-on for M365 E3, E5, and then Office E3, E5, S3 sometimes, that has Purview, that has that information rights management. There is also a Copilot agent support for personal or family plans. That is not ground in work data. It just gives me some agent capabilities within the various apps. Now with this M365 Copilot, I said it's paid, but there's actually two different ways of licensing this. So one option, I should just delete this. One option is a per user per month. So there's a set amount, for example, $30 a month per user. I mean, it could change US dollars right now, but I just enable a user. So it's very predictable billing. Or I can do pay as you go. Pay for each prompt they perform. Now, it means it's not predictable. It might be good if I had very rare people using it. Not the people that are rare, they have a rare number of interactions with it. The billing will be less predictable. And what's happening in this model is this pay-go actually bills against an Azure subscription. That's actually how you're paying for that capability. But then I could use Azure capabilities. I could use Azure budgets. I could use Azure cost analysis, cost reporting. I could create alerts at different budget thresholds to send notifications, all those wonderful things. But hey, that's now billing against an Azure portal. Obviously, as part of this world, this Copilot, I am assigning licenses. So when I think about the licenses, I assign the capability. Yes, I could do it to a user. But what makes more sense typically is to assign it to groups. And obviously then I add users into the groups that would then get the license. So that's the typical model through which we do that. And I can do that all in the M365 portal. So if we jump over again, I didn't find the M365 portal. Here we go. So if I was, for example, to look up my users, you could just select a user, and as part of the user's properties, there's licenses, and then I can go and enable them for the various licenses that I have available. So like Copilot would show here, etc., etc. The other option that you could do is go to your groups, and then as part of a group, let's do Justice League, I could assign licenses. And then that would apply to everyone in the group, providing I have enough licenses. So there's different ways I can actually go ahead and apply that. And then the other type of license I have here is the Copilot Studio. So I want to be able to go and create my full other types of thing. Once again, this is paid. And once again, I can go and ground in the various work data and a whole bunch of other connectors here. Now, this one's actually interesting. So I can buy packs of Copilot credits. So I can buy credit packs. Or I can do pay-go, where again, it's going to go ahead and bill against an Azure subscription. So I've got that in my environment. So if I was to go and look at my Azure subscription quickly, and I look at my Copilot pay-as-you-go resource group, it looks empty. But if I change my view to show hidden, this is the resource. So as I create Copilot agents and they get used, it would bill against this resource. And so then my Azure budget capabilities, all the other things, would just show up in this Azure sub as a bill. So you have choices on how I want to do that. Obviously, as an organization, I can enable, disable different features. At the tenant level, maybe I don't want Teams transcriptions because of regulatory requirements. One of the other things typically we will do, so we're thinking about adoption. So, okay, great. These are the capabilities. If I'm thinking about how I want to actually go and actually adopt, then yes, at the tenant level, there are certain things I can enable, disable. But that's obviously that's pretty significant to do that. Another approach is many of the things can actually be enabled, disabled at a group level. And that's generally going to be preferred. So if you go into the M365 admin portal, Copilot settings, I'll be able to go and enable, disable various things. As I think about the right way to do this, most of the time what we'll do is a pilot. So I would enable a certain group in the pilot. I would make sure I had good training going on for my users. Then I would have broader adoption. And obviously what I want is a way for feedback from the users. So those are kind of critical things to have as part of the environment to ensure this is actually successful for everything I'm doing. Now, you're paying for these licenses. Great. One of the things you're going to very much care about is it actually being used? So in the M365 admin portal, I can see under billing licenses, the number of active Copilot licenses and how many have actually been assigned. Now, again, my environment is not a great example of this because I don't have much going on. But if I go down to billing licenses, it would show me, and it would show me the Copilots down here, but it would show me the counts. So I would see how many is assigned out of how many I own. So I could always go and work those things out. And I already showed you in the Azure portal how you could go and look at that resource and then use the various cost capabilities to see what is the cost of that pay as you go. So that's great to a certain extent. So, okay, in terms of understanding what's being used, yes, for this, to see how many is assigned and being leveraged, I can use the M365 admin portal. For the pay-as-you-go, I use the Azure subscription. But that just means they've got the license. What about, are they using the license? How often are they using it? Is it a one-off use? Where are they using it? And so the other thing the admin portal can show me is who is using it, not just who has a license, and then when, how often are they using it, and where are they using it? So there's a whole set of reports that will show me exactly that. Because if I have people with licenses, but they're not using it, well, I would firstly encourage them to use it. I would focus on why they should use it for them, the value to their role, the value to what they're doing. But if they still don't use it, I would take it away and reassign it to someone else. So again, in the portal, what I could do is there's also reports. And as part of the reporting, there's usage. And there's a whole bunch of different Copilot options here. And again, it's not going to show much in my environment, but I'll be able to go and see details around the Copilots, the chats, the search, the agents. So I can go and see everything that's actually happening within my environment. But there's another level. What about if I actually also want a deeper insight into what's happening? Well, that's where we're going to use Viva Insights. So Viva Insights will actually give me Copilot analytics. So it's going to go way beyond how many meetings were summarized, how often Copilot summarized email threads, what areas of work are seeing the heaviest AI interaction. And I'll actually just show you the docs page for this rather than my very bare bones, because this is the type of content you can get. So this is Viva Insights, and it would show you the licenses, how many meetings are doing the things, the emails. It gives you research insight into how it's being used. I can drill into very, very deep detail on all of the different aspects. So Viva Insights is where you would go to really understand how it's being used. The trends, is usage growing? Do early adopters keep using it? Like, the Viva Insights is that place that you would want to go and leverage. And so that's the key content. I mean, obviously, there's quite a lot to it. I hope it helps. Make sure you're prepared. So if you're doing it online, make sure you have the environment set up per the instructions, like one monitor, one computer, no one around. If it's in person, make sure you know where the testing center is, where to park. Don't add stress to your day. During the exam, take your time. If you don't know something, you can mark it and come back to it. If you have no clue, make an educated guess. They don't try and confuse you with features. And if you did fail, it's not the end of the world. Look at the score report, look at where you're weakest, and just refocus on that area, and you'll get it next time. But really, really, the key to success here is go through the Microsoft Learning, go through all those training exercises. Hopefully this helps summarize and just re-stress a few of the key things. But I wish you the best of luck.